the third Women's Leadership Initiative Series session. My name is Georgina Dodge, and I am the university's Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President, as well as the Title IX Coordinator, as well as the previous president of the Iowa Network for Women in Higher Education, who are co-sponsoring this event with us. And for some of you, this is your first time attending a Women's Leadership Initiative, and I'm very excited to have you with us today. And those of you who have attended previous events, I'm delighted that you are here as well. And I appreciate you all coming out on a rainy day to be with us. Whenever it rains, my heart falls, and I think, oh, no one's going to show up. As I look around, I'm just delighted that we have such a lovely turnout today. But I always know that Lynette draws a crowd, so I should not have been at all surprised. And I'm really delighted that Lynette is able to join us today, but I did want to start out with some thank yous. Because for those of you who pulled into the facility parking lot and needed a parking sticker, there were two women who were out there in the rain with their umbrellas giving you those stickers. So Kendra Malone and Bria Marcello, thank you so much for And I should also add that Bria has been instrumental in pulling this event together, and she has worked with Kim Carter, who's out in the hallway, who checked you in. And I want to thank Kim. She's responsible for the little table arrangements that you have, as well as the exterior decor on her table outside. And then finally, I do want to let you know that this event is being recorded. One of the reasons we put this series together along with Iowa WHE is we realize that with a state like ours, it's often difficult for women at different higher education institutions in like roles to get together and have conversations. And so what we're hoping is that this tape will be used by others who can gather on their campuses, and even here in Iowa, who can gather on their campuses with a group of women. When we have the tape fully transcribed, it'll be put up online, both on the diversity website here at Iowa, as well as the Iowa WHE website. And then Bria, in her brilliance, will actually develop a discussion guide to accompany the video that you'll be able to use as well. So please take advantage of that resource. And so now I'm going to waste no further time, but I have the pleasure of introducing an incredible leader and colleague, Lynette Marshall. And for those of you who know Lynette and Lynette's very busy schedule, I know that you appreciate how lucky we are to have her here today, rather than her being in some other part of the country or even some other part of the world for that matter. Lynette Marshall became president of the University of Iowa Foundation in 2006. In her time at Iowa, the foundation has experienced record performance and growth for people and programs throughout the University of Iowa. She has launched a number of initiatives, including a program to engage more UI students in philanthropy and volunteerism, well, that was a mouthful, efforts to involve more women in philanthropic leadership, and a strategic planning effort that is guiding the foundation in its service to the university. Just last week, the 2015 annual report was released, and I would encourage you to go to the foundation's website and check it out. A graduate of the University of Illinois and a longtime and senior fundraising professional there, Lynette earned her Certified Fundraising Executive designation from the Association of Fundraising Professionals in 1992, and is a member of several national fundraising organizations, and has taught development workshops nationally and internationally. And Lynette also currently serves as Dean of the Big Ten Fundraisers Institute. Lynette was reared on a fifth-generation family farm near Peoria, Illinois. She and her husband, Jeffrey Ford, have two children, Michelle and Catherine is here with us today. She and her husband enjoy providing leadership to several community organizations in the Iowa City area. Lynette, whom the Quarter Business Journal named its 2010 Woman of Influence, is a member of the Iowa City New Rotary, where she chairs the World Community Service Committee. In addition, she is an active member of the Johnson County United Way Board of Directors and the Women's Leadership Circle. Today, her session, Practicing Leadership, will give you some irreplaceable insight to her success and brilliance. Please join me in welcoming Lynette Marshall.
Levitt Center for University Advancement, and this is the home for not only the University of Iowa Foundation, which I have the joy of working with, but also the University of Iowa Alumni Association. So thank you for inviting me, Georgina. I was humbled to be invited, and I guess once I decided I was going to accept it because I know that each of our stories matter, even though they may seem pedestrian to us in our own experiences, because it's all we know. I decided that I would be willing to share my story as a result of that appreciation and that understanding. And I also want to acknowledge the remarkable women in this room. I've had a chance to say hello to many of you. We have Community College President with us from the Quad Cities, thank you. From one of Iowa's coasts, we have people from both coasts of the Iowa River here today. And it's really a joy for me to be able to welcome you here to this beautiful facility, to our campus, if you're not from the University of Iowa campus, and to just be able to share a few thoughts to start a conversation for us today. And as I understand from the invitation, we really hope that this will become a conversation, so as you hear things, please be sure to think about questions or comments or discussion items that we might have when I'm done. I want to acknowledge really with humility that Sally Mason and Christine Grant were the first two speakers in this series, and I did take a look at what they did, and will speak a little bit more to my appreciation really to both of those women who've been very important in both my personal and professional life here at the University of Iowa. So where does the title Practicing Leadership come from? As I reflect on the topic of leadership, I continue to recognize in my own life some patterns of repetition of practicing what we call leadership. And so today I decided what I will do is share 4 values of leadership that I have come to recognize in my own life and my own experience that I cherish. And I think it probably makes sense for me to start at the beginning. And Georgina gave you a little bit of a flavor of that. Those important formative experiences that we all have. So I did indeed have the privilege of growing up on a 5th generation family farm north of Peoria, Illinois, rooted in a very deep agricultural and land ethic, with parents who encouraged me in all things. I know not all of us have the privilege of that, but I did and I still do. My folks were here in town just this week as we celebrated my mother's 79th birthday. I wear a daily and symbolic reminder of that. This double wedding band ring combines my great-great-grandparents' wedding rings when they were married in 1858. And that's about the time that our family came in a Conestoga covered wagon from upstate New York to settle in the rich and fertile prairies of central Illinois with lots of other immigrants who are our ancestors. My great-grandparents built a cabin on the location of that family farm, and a few years after that, they added a living room and a dining room and a parlor to the front of the log cabin. Then in the 40s, they tore down the log cabin and built a kitchen on the back of it. And that location is where my siblings and I grew up, that 5th generation family farm location, and the original farmhouse on the very location of that cabin. My appreciation for that rootedness and that family connection has informed my entire life. And my parents still live within 100 yards of that farmhouse. Fortunately, it's not the same house. They finally tore it down and burned it, which was long overdue. And they have a lovely small brick ranch that actually has air conditioning, which we did not grow up with when I was there. My dad was a traditional farmer. My mother was a nurse and homemaker. And I grew up with the rural, small-town experiences that perhaps many of you did as well. I'm the eldest child of 4 siblings, and we attended church every Sunday without fail. And the church, too, was in the midst of those cornfields. It's been there for 160 years in those cornfields and is still a place of community for the people in that rural area north of Peoria. My high school graduating class had 27 students in it. It was Sparland High School, which is now consolidated with several other schools in the area, and it was 12 miles and a long bus ride from home. So what comes of that? What leadership value comes out of that? I think one of the things that I would describe from that is really a sense of rootedness and a sense of appreciation for place. I'm a person who really wants to stay in one place and who cherishes the values that come from that rootedness, wherever it might be. Now, I was fortunate to be predisposed to enjoying music when I was a young one, and I started piano lessons when I was 8 years old. And I think that really contributed to my appreciation for learning things by doing them 3 times slow, 3 times medium, and 3 times fast. Georgina perhaps had that experience as well. Wonderful piano lessons for 10 years from a delightful great aunt, actually. And it's remarkable to me how useful that understanding of what we can learn is if we repeat it 3 times slow, 3 times medium, and 3 times fast. Of course, there was also 10 years of 4-H club work. Perhaps some of you experienced 4-H as well, where the motto was learning by doing. Every month we pledged, join me now if you know this, my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living for my club, my community, my country, and my world. Indeed, got at least one 4-H'er out here. And then FFA, what was then explicitly known as the Future Farmers of America, was part of my high school experience and really remarkably formative to me as I had the privilege of participating in school and district and state and national contests that contributed to the public speaking skills that I use nearly every day now in my work. At the same time I was involved in some of these programs in high school, I embarked upon the pageantry business. Not just any beauty pageant, but the pork queen pageant. You laugh, but I can honestly say with a straight face, and I was thinking of it last week when I was in a particular investiture, how useful it is for those skills that I gained from serving as the 1981 National Pork Queen, the terrific training ground for what I do today. The skills I honed in enduring what can sometimes be grueling travel. I went to 22 states during the year that I served as Pork Queen. The impromptu public speaking, I will never forget going to Mankato State University, landing, and them saying, we have you scheduled to speak for an hour to this lecture class of 350 students, and it'll be at 4 o'clock this afternoon. That was my first knowledge that I was speaking to this group of students. That's something one doesn't forget. And then smiling when you don't always feel like it, which of course is a useful trait for all of us. To repeat the point, it certainly was not a beauty pageant, but rather a unique opportunity for me to represent an industry that had been important to our family for many, many years. So those were early formative years. And as I reflect on them, I see the values that continue to shape me today. During my school years, I learned the discipline of practicing to make something perfect, a regular participation and engagement in organizations, whether it was church or 4-H or FFA, and of accepting leadership in groups that you value. And as I was saying to Georgina, it's not necessarily because you were selected for leadership, it was that if it was going to get done, you needed to do it because there weren't that many people there. When I left Sparland High School to go off to the University of Illinois, I was one of 2 students from my class who went to a 4-year college. And I did so with the trepidation of any high school valedictorian from a class of 27 who was going to a university of 35,000 students. I knew that my small school curriculum had been inadequate, and I wasn't sure if I would be able to compete. But fortunately, for me, I didn't need to be the smartest one in the class, I just needed to have the outwork everybody else. And I knew how to do that. I knew how to work. And I soon, very soon, experienced really the joy of finding my own niche in a wonderful and expansive collegiate experience. While at the University of Illinois, lo and behold, I continued practicing the art of leadership and found myself involved as a freshman representative for our Ag Student Council in the college, and eventually served as president of that Ag Student Council. And the world unfolded before me at the University of Illinois, and I owe so much to those mentors from that great institution who nurtured my educational and leadership experience. As an aside, noting to those of you who are a lot younger than I am the importance of all of your experiences, because of my pork queen experience, I attended a lot of pork producer meetings in the state of Illinois and across the country, where there were faculty from the Department of Animal Sciences who were also involved involved with the pork industry. And among those young faculty members who were there was a swine nutritionist who also happened to serve as the faculty advisor to the Ag Student Council. He eventually rose through the ranks from assistant to associate to full professor. Then he became department head of the Department of Animal Sciences. Then he became dean of the College of Agriculture. Then he became a few other things. And he stepped down last May as the president of the University of Illinois. So because of my experiences as the county and state and national pork queen, I had the gift of a lifelong friend and mentor and leader in Bob Easter, now emeritus president of the University of Illinois. Shortly after I got my bachelor's degree in agriculture, not something that there are a lot of us in my role that have, I got my first job as fundraiser at my alma mater. And I started to think at that time more deeply about my religious upbringing, remembering that it was a weekly occurrence to go to church, never missing a Sunday. And I started to think about the social context of the patriarchal church as I knew it. I had heard my first woman preach when I was in college. I did a summer internship in Washington, D.C. for the National Pork Producers Council, and I went to the National Cathedral for church one morning, and lo and behold, there was a woman Episcopal priest, and I wept. But that was the first time I had ever seen a woman minister. And I was starting to be invited to take, again, leadership positions at the Wesley Foundation at the University of Illinois, where I was attending. And I started to have real discomfort with the God the Father language that was so prevalent. And I started participating in a feminist theology study group at our church. Now, since then, I have spent years reading, studying, thinking about the patriarchal nature of most organized religion, not just Christianity, of course, including doing my master's degree with a minor in women's studies and enjoying substantial coursework in looking at the history of the early organized church and its role in women's education and their lives. I have shelves upon shelves of books that help me to think more deeply about that, about the masculine dominance of our religious traditions, and this question, and perhaps you will take this away with you today. If our traditional, most holy and universal images are male, then what characteristics will be honored in this world? So what does this say about reactions to women in leadership who try to practice leadership? And I think this really leads me to my third leadership value that I hold, which is acknowledging and embracing the authenticity of my own and others' feminine leadership experience, which is why it's so important that we're here together today. So that maybe helps explain why I gave you a novel about an Arthurian legend as the suggestion of my leadership book. Honestly, I told you, Gina, I really tried to think of something that was more traditional, but it just doesn't work for me. This is the book that, as I reflected, has been most influential to me in my own leadership journey. I looked at the titles that Sally Mason and Christine Grant gave, and it wasn't it for me. So speaking of authenticity, I'm giving you the real deal here. So Mists of Avalon is a work of fiction. Any of you read it? Not many, one or two? Okay. It's a retelling of the Arthurian legend from a woman's point of view. And I have read this 876-page tome 4 or 5 times, I will confess. I love it. It was recommended to me in one of those feminist theology workshops and book groups that I was in when I was probably in my late 20s. And each time I read it, I am challenged and inspired by the images and the stories of the goddess, representing the value of feminine energy and traits, as well as of the priestesses and the maidens and the crones that show up in this wonderful story. And I'm inspired by their images and representations of power and of influence and drive in this imaginary legend and world. I still love the book, and honestly, it is indeed the one that has probably influenced me most. Now, while I acknowledge the influence of feminist theology and the wonderful things that I've had a chance to read, it is true that most of my leadership mentors have been men. I was in a college of agriculture for 4 years as an undergraduate and 18 years as a young professional, and I am incredibly grateful to the 4 deans that I worked with during that time, all men, who allowed me to grow as a young professional and who nurtured me and supported me and challenged me in my early career. They were wise and wonderful influences, and I shall always be grateful. My father always trusted me in my decision-making, loving me enough to let me make my own mistakes, but being gracious enough to never identify them as such, at least not to me. And I had some amazing women in my life as well, including my fiercely independent patriarchal grandmother, the one whose family created that cabin and that farmstead, and my mother, of course, who would never in a million years identify as a feminist, but of course she is one. When I was in high school and still thinking about following her into the nursing profession, I will never forget her saying to me one day, "You don't want to be a nurse. You don't want to take orders from doctors for the rest of your life." And of course, at that time, all doctors were men. Now, I don't want to suggest or represent that this leadership journey, any of our leadership journeys, are linear or easy. And I think we do it a disservice if we portray it as so. And so I'm going to acknowledge some of that for you as well. There are personal and professional disappointments that we all have in our lives. And we need to learn to overcome those roadblocks and those crises and allow others around us to help us beyond them. During the first 5 years of my professional life, I was married. My husband was shortly thereafter diagnosed with bipolar illness and multiple sclerosis, and he was hospitalized for manic episodes in a locked ward in the mental health unit. We were divorced after a number of years, and then happily Jeffrey and I found one another and were married, and we will happily celebrate our 24th wedding anniversary next week. Fast forward to a professional and institutional crisis at the University of Illinois that caused me to leave my alma mater after a gratifying and productive 22-year career, devoting everything I had to its philanthropic success. That deep disappointment led me, though, to my openness to accepting this magnificent privilege of serving as president of the University of Iowa Foundation at the age of 45. And then some of you in the room, but probably not even a majority of you, know that my husband, Jeffrey Ford, had a life-threatening illness a couple of years ago that caused him to lose both of his legs, all of his fingers, and much of his kidney function. Our lives were rocked to the core. But this incredibly rich community of brilliant healthcare workers, selfless foundation and university colleagues, generous friends, and an amazing family, especially our daughter Catherine, carried us through those dark days. That brings me back, honestly, to my comment about Christine Grant and Sally Mason, who both supported us so generously then. Christine showed up with 6 quarts of Scottish soup For those of you who don't know Christine, she's a native of Scotland, and we had this great, robust soup that we were able to just pull out of the freezer at that time and have a meal in a moment. And I'm deeply grateful to her for revealing her love and care in that way. At that time, I took 6 full weeks. That was all that I had of FMLA. Catherine stepped away from her academic semester that fall. But because of this rich community of support, I was able to return to work, and she was able to return to her coursework the next semester and discover that my foundation had been very ably led by dear and trusted colleagues in my absence. And as a result of this experience, I learned that I could trust my colleagues in ways that is so very important. Only through this powerful and difficult experience have I fully come to appreciate the trust that we should place in our colleagues and in our family and our friends. So every day we are asked to practice this art of leadership in our work, in our community, and for our families. My own journey has led me to these 4 values: cherishing the depth of commitment of leadership and the place where I am located, practicing the work of leadership, and sometimes I call on the wisdom of that 3 times slow, 3 times medium, and 3 times fast, even today, claiming the authenticity of the experiences of women leaders, and trusting those around me to help in this awesome task. It's true that when you are asked to do something like this, and when Georgina called on me to do this, it sometimes reveals unexpected truths. I appreciate the invitation to do this and to think about it, and to do the work of revealing it for myself. And I hope it's enough to start a conversation amongst us today and to learn from one another's experiences. I hope that these values and a little bit of my own story, pedestrian as it may be, will prompt your own contributions and your own questions that we can now engage. Thank you. What would you like to talk about? Yes?
Hi, Diana Cates, partner of the
Hi, Diana.
I have a sense that there's a lot of anguish on campus right now, due in part to the hiring process of our new president. And as a leader of a department, I'm finding it real challenging to figure out how, on the one hand, to honor the fact that my faculty are upset and unhappy, and yet also lead. And I think leading includes critically having hope. That's a really difficult balance. But I wonder if you have any insight on how to lead through a time when the people around you, rather than being a support for you, are really, in some ways, a special challenge.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a great question, and I would reflect on some experience that I had a few years ago, actually. Some of you may remember, for what I thought was just a completely unknown reason, that my register decided to go after the University of Iowa Foundation in a really critical way. And it was incumbent upon me, in the midst of a great deal of my own anger about what I felt like was an unfair attack, to help the organization go forward and to your point, be prepared to address some really tough issues. And I guess for myself, I'd like to honestly take it away from sort of the current events that are here on campus, acknowledging the importance of those. But you know what, I think that's part of the really hard work of leadership, and part of the responsibility of leadership is having the opportunity to give an authentic sense of hope and optimism to a group of people, and to help them see that in spite of some challenging times, there are ways that will go forward through a particular situation. It's really hard work, and I think we each can probably reflect on particular experiences that we've had. But there was a time in my career when I had a little piece of paper, like on a sticky note, on my desk that was a quote from the movie A League of Their Own, about the women's baseball team, right? And the quote was, "Of course it's hard. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it." There's times when I had to look at that a lot through each day. And, you know, in those moments, I think it's important that maybe we have an opportunity to look to other leaders who are trying to help lead through those moments, and acknowledge the challenge that's there. You may not be able to get that support from your faculty right now, but maybe other administrators in the institution that would be helpful to address some of that. That would be the way I would be, you know, sort of reaching for community, I think. You know, it's a good question, and it's a very real issue. So we're fine if we don't talk. Georgina?
So my question's a little off the wall because I have a fascination with the American farm. I haven't heard of this, so it just fascinates me. So what are some tangible lessons you took away from having to be, from being in that environment, from having to do work in that environment specifically? Because I bet you had chores.
All right, so you can't like tell anybody. But one of the great things about my dad was that he was a bit of a chauvinist, and I didn't have to do chores because I was a girl. True story. So I have two brothers who are younger than I am, and then a sister, and so the boys were expected to go out and do those things. I, of course, had chores inside, but you know, they were like helping make dinner and doing the dishes and helping clean. I mean, it was a very sort of traditional segregation of labor. That being said, I did end up with a degree in agriculture, right? I mean, I cherished that rootedness and that land ethic. And there are lots of women who did agricultural chores in the community, but I wasn't one of them. It was back when, so some of you nodded when I talked about 4-H. There were two 4-H clubs, a boys club and a girls club, and we were the La Prairie Ramblerettes, and the boys were the La Prairie Ramblers. And that was not uncommon in our county with the various 4-H clubs. So, you know, I'm talking about 1969 when I would have joined 4-H, and yeah, it was a little bit different back then. Lots of work on a farm. I still have lots of friends who are practicing agriculture, who have active working farms, and one of the fun things I enjoy about Facebook, honestly, are some of the women who are a little bit younger than me from the University of Illinois College of Ag that I worked with, and now their kids are starting to show animals, show their hogs or show their cattle at the county fairs and things. Nothing more adorable than, you know, an 8 or 10-year-old with her big belt buckle on, showing her barrow at the county fair. But that was not my experience. I was cooking and sewing with the girls. Yes?
With your degree in agriculture, what led you to fundraising? And more particularly, how did you find your professional passion?
Yeah, great
And how do
question.
you help other people nurture theirs?
So if anybody's interested in development, please see us. We are always recruiting. So Georgina told me I could I could talk about that. But back then, it was quite different. And so when I graduated from college in 1983, there was a small University of Illinois Foundation. There were probably maybe 24 people who worked for the University of Illinois Foundation. They were just completing a $100 million campaign. Mind you, we raised $250 million a year now. But you know, back then, this was a long time ago. And so when I was an undergrad, I worked for 4 years as my student job in the office of the Associate Dean for Academic Programs in the College of Agriculture. And I worked on behalf of a scholarship program. I just, you know, like I stuffed envelopes and took pictures of scholarship recipients and wrote bios and things. But it was really fundamentally, upon reflection, it was sort of fundraising work. The associate dean I worked for 4 years was a mentor, was a great counselor for me. And when I was graduating from college, he became dean. True story, he says to me, Lynette,
I want to hire my own fundraiser. One of the things I'm asking for in my package when I become dean is to have a new position for a fundraiser, and I want you to apply for it. Okay. I worked for him for 4 years. I trusted him, and he gave me the job, right? I mean, it wasn't honestly more complicated than that. I had an empty desk, empty file cabinets, no program. I had no idea what to do, and a typewriter, right, an electric typewriter. There had been a scholarship program that I had been a part of for 4 years, and so I thought, well, that's people giving money, I'll start there. And from there, you know, I started learning a little bit. I was able to reach out across campus to a few other people who were doing fundraising. But it was really, you know, a very early stage of public higher education fundraising. So I didn't choose that career. I was going to be a nurse, then I was going to be a doctor until I learned how to take chemistry, and I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. And then I was going to be an agricultural economist, really. I had a passion for food policy, agricultural policy. You know, I thought I was going to go work for USDA and be an ag economist, but then I learned you had to like take statistics again if you got your master's degree, and so good thing fundraising came along. And I've been in it ever since. Now, 30 plus years later, I'm happy to say, especially, and I'll give a little shout out for the University of Iowa, we actually have an undergraduate certificate program in fundraising and philanthropic studies communications. It requires 22 credit hours of effort. We have a student philanthropy group that is associated with the University of Iowa Foundation for students who are interested. We've got all of our Life with Phil, Phil was here, I am Phil, all of our marketing efforts on campus to help the campus community understand the impact of philanthropy on our community. Our board meeting is next Friday, so I have lots of data fresh in my head. When you look at the state's contribution to our general education fund at the university, it's about $225 million. The cash and commitments made to the University of Iowa last year from philanthropy is $240 million. So we've actually crossed that line in the last 2 years where cash and commitments are more than we're getting from the state. It doesn't mean that the money that we raise is as flexible as the state dollars, because 99% of it's designated to specific priorities, but it's really an important piece of the puzzle now. And we need more people working in philanthropy who enjoy engaging with people who are interested in being generous supporters of the variety of things that we have happen on this campus, from academic work at the undergraduate level, to clinical nursing, to the hospital, to medical research, to engineering, to athletics. All of those sorts of things are part of what we do here at the foundation and generate support for. Yes?
I enjoyed hearing about your interest in feminist theory and kind of recognition of the patriarchal culture of leadership. I'm just wondering how your own leadership style you think may have differed, or what some key differences are.
Than men?
Yeah.
I sort of wonder about that sometimes, since I grew up in such an agriculturally male-oriented program. So I think about that, and you know, I think it's easy to think that ideal leadership is the male model, and how is that different now with what I do? I think I'm generally, I know everybody says this, but I do think I'm generally a consensus builder. I really like to have people sort of come to a decision together, and I think that may be different than some folks. I think that's more intuitive than observed from my early years in leadership at the University of Illinois. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll think about that. So really, I mean, most of the people, I guess Sally Mason was the first woman I worked with /for, right? I mean, all of the department heads, all of the deans, all of the chancellors, all of the presidents at the University of Illinois were men, and really still are. And so coming here was quite remarkable. Quite remarkable and different. If you recall 10 years ago, we had a woman mayor, we had a woman interim provost, we had a woman president, we had a woman head of the foundation, and I was like, whoa, this is great. And different, very, very different. And so, you know, I've sort of been learning and observing some of that just in the last decade. Yeah.
On that same point, which I thought was really interesting, I sometimes wonder if it's the perception of difference that's more than the actual difference in the way women and men lead. And sometimes I think that women like you, who identify with their father and other male leaders, you probably lead kind of like they do.
Right.
You've seen what they do, you've watched it, you've decided what parts you like, and that is, becomes your style too. But from the outside, people who are not used to seeing leadership in a woman's body think that you're doing it differently and assume that there's a different way. And I wonder if you've encountered that you have to find ways to remind people that leadership doesn't have to have a gender, but that you need to help people move from the assumption that it does.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know, this notion of practicing leadership. So I mean, I've been a leader of a lot of things, right? From 4-H club to FFA. It's been part of me for a really long time. And so I haven't until recently, when you get gray hair and start to be asked to think about these things, and then you really have to think about them differently. I haven't reflected on that as much previously as I probably am now at this stage of my career, and as I'm trying to help other young women think about what it means for them to move forward in their organizations and to have those responsibilities and experiences. Tell me about your experience. I mean, you're in a very male-dominated industry and discipline, and yet doing great things. How do you relate to that?
Well, I think that often
Maybe you should introduce yourself and share your role, so the rest of the group
I'm
knows.
Carrie Hornbuckle, I'm Associate Dean in College of Carrie.
Carrie Hornbuckle, Associate Dean, College of Engineering here in Iowa.
And I guess I just often notice that the things I do aren't really different from the men leaders that I've admired. But that sometimes people think that I'm doing things differently because I have this voice and I look this way, and it's kind of a distraction sometimes. Like, let's just get going. And but I think in Iowa, the further I get from Iowa City, the more I notice that I have to spend time removing the distraction of the assumptions that come with leadership in a woman's body.
That's a great comment. And what we do as women to get rid of those distractions, right? I mean, how do we dress? We dress in ways that, we don't want to be distracting, right? I mean, that makes a difference, right? I mean, you think about what you're going to wear, what color pantyhose you're going to put on, or tights, or what kind of shoes you're going to wear, or whether you have a low-cut neckline in your outfit. And yes, because you don't want it to be distracted. I mean, I remember a stage in my career where I knew one of my donors didn't like colored pantyhose, and so I wouldn't wear colored pantyhose because I didn't want him to be distracted by my pantyhose and while he was thinking about making a $1 million gift. Yes.
I just, being from rural Iowa and being very ingrained into religion, how did you deal with the fact that the religious beliefs that you grew up with didn't really align with how you felt, and how do you deal with that now?
Very interesting question. Okay, so I grew up in the Methodist/Presbyterian traditions. It was actually a small church that merged, so a Methodist church joined with a Presbyterian church, so we were really quite combined. And then went off to college and attended a Methodist church. And Jeffrey and I were married. Jeffrey's actually a Methodist minister, or trained as a Methodist minister. And after Catherine was born, we really started struggling with the lack of ability of Methodist tradition in particular to accept gays and lesbians in the, it wasn't that they weren't sort of welcomed in the community, but you couldn't be a minister, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and still, I mean, really, give me a break. So what we discovered was we were still going to church every Sunday, but we were dropping our kids off at Sunday school and then going to the coffee shop. Wow, that's really not consistent with who I am. This is not the way I grew up. And he was a minister, right? I mean, he had by that time taken family leave to be an at-home dad, which he has been since then. Lucky me. And so we said, well, you know, this probably says something about our faith tradition and our own theology, and maybe like where we should be going to church. And so we identified a couple of faith communities in Champaign-Urbana that we said we were going to try out, and we agreed to go to one of them the next Sunday, which happened to be the Unitarian Universalist Church down the street about 4 blocks, and we have sort of been UUs ever since because of a much more liberal theology in that. Well, never mind, UUs don't really have theology, but a much more liberal community. And so, yeah, that was really hard for my parents. Still is. We don't talk about that very much because, you know, it was hard for them to understand that, and us moving sort of away from that theological tradition of mainline Methodist or Presbyterian theology. Yes.
As the University of Iowa Foundation president, you have to know excuse me, about so many things going on in the university and match particular stories that are unique to donors who are attached to those. How do you go about learning about the big picture and how to
This is the #1 reason why you should all become fundraisers. It is so much fun. Really, what an incredible gift. So when I worked for the College of Agriculture, I would find that I would meet this really cool faculty member in animal sciences and know this really interesting guy in ag econ, and they didn't know each other. And I thought, oh, you guys are so interesting, you should know one another. Because I had the privilege of knowing people in all of the departments and representing all of the departments. Now it's bigger, and so my knowledge is even thinner in many ways, but it is exactly our job to have a sense of the priorities of the institution and to know enough about the areas that we represent. So, you know, there are people who have much narrower areas of focus, lucky them, than I do right now, and so they know much more deeply than I do, but you know, my job is to have a pretty good sense of things across the institution. And then the gift is meeting someone and having that, you know, that moment where I think, oh my gosh, this person would be interested in that, and maybe they'll give us money to do that. So that's really one of the joys of being a facilitator of people's generosity to programs at the university. It's really a lot of fun.
We are running out of time, so please join me again in giving Lynette.
Thank you so much, Lynette. That was fabulous to hear from you, and you've given me a lot to think about. Some of the conversation that was going on over here, I would be pondering that for the rest of the day, if not the rest of the week, most definitely. I'm grateful to all of you for being here. I would like you all to join me again in thanking Lynette, not just for giving us a talk, but actually kind of hosting us here in our house. The foundation is housed here at the Levitt Center, so that value of place, that rootedness is important as well. So join me again in thanking Lynette. And I really thank all of you, because what's important about this series is that we take some of the kernels, really appropriate for centerpieces, I'm just saying. We take some of the kernels of knowledge, some of the things that have piqued our interest that have been said today, and even things that have been said amongst ourselves in conversation at our table. Those are the jewels that we take away from us, with us, and that we continue to have conversation about What does it look like to be in leadership on this campus? What does it look like to be a woman in leadership on campus? What does it look like within certain fields and dealing with certain populations at certain historical moments to be a woman in leadership at this campus? These are all conversations that we need to have, and now you have colleagues with whom to have some of that dialogue with. And so I thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful weekend, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks again.
And there's more desserts, Maria's going like this, please take these as you go.